a beautiful thing to be on fire. It is a beautiful thing to be on fire. Is it not? Yeah. It is a beautiful thing to be on fire. These words are taken from the opening chapter of our brother scholar, Dr. Cornel West's new book, Black Prophetic Fire. And from where I stand, you friends are the beautiful blaze that he must have had in mind with that title. On behalf of the Princeton University Center for African American Studies, we welcome you to our annual conversation series, #AAS2, a forum that's one part of the center's broader commitment to modeling a form of engagement that enriches public discussion on a range of topics. And today our focus is on Black thought in the hour of chaos. And we're joined by three of my favorite people, brilliant scholars, but incredible human beings whose own intellectual fire warms up the academy for the rest of us. Professor Imani Perry, Professor Eddie Glaude, and Dr. Cornel West, who are here to help us think through the difficult question, what do we need now in the face of crisis? Crisis as it relates to employment, incarceration, police violence, yes, but also as it relates to civic crisis in the paucity of courageous voices we currently see engaged in public debate. As Brother West so poignantly describes in the conclusion of this important text, quote, to be a highly successful Black professional or politician is too often to be well adjusted to injustice and well adapted to indifference. He goes on to say that the Black prophetic tradition has never been confined to the interests and situations of Black people. It is rooted in principles and visions that embrace these interests and confront the situations, but its message is for the country and the world. The Black prophetic tradition has been the leaven in the American democratic loaf. When the Black prophetic tradition is strong, poor and working people of all colors benefit. When the Black prophetic tradition is weak, poor and working class people are overlooked. On the international level, when the Black prophetic tradition is vital and vibrant, anti-imperial critiques are intense, and the plight of the wretched of the earth is elevated. What does it profit a people, he goes on to say, for a symbolic figure to gain presidential power if we turn our backs from the suffering of poor and working people and thereby lose our souls? The Black prophetic tradition has tried to redeem the soul of our fragile democratic experiment. Is it redeemable, he asks. So to help us reflect together about that question, I can think of no better trio. Brilliant, engaged, and loving human beings who really need no introduction. But for the benefit of those who stumble upon a recording of this conversation at some later date, let me just briefly say a few words about each. Dr. Imani Perry is Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, and the interdisciplinary range of her expertise is just breathtaking. From law to literary and cultural studies to music and the social sciences. She's published numerous articles and books in the areas of cultural studies, African American studies, and law, and is the author most recently of the book, More Beautiful, More Terrible, in which she notes that, quote, in the contemporary US, we routinely fail to acknowledge how terrible things actually are with respect to race. It is indeed more terrible than what we say. And so, this is a sober book, she says, but it's a hopeful one, because in the midst of all that is terrible, there is still beautiful possibility. Indeed, it's a beautiful thing to be on fire. Dr. Eddie Glaude, in turn, is a professor of African American Studies and Religion at Princeton University, and is the author of numerous publications related to American pragmatism, African American religious history, and its place in American public life. Among his many works is the book In a Shade of Blue, Pragmatism and the Politics of Black America, in which he cautions us, quote, "We live in a different time, a moment made possible by the extraordinary efforts of past generations, but our task is different because the conditions have changed. We must imagine a politics that esteems the democratic virtue of free and open debate and insists on the capacities of everyday, ordinary folk to engage fully in what the rap artist Talib Kweli so brilliantly calls the beautiful struggle." Yet again, it is a beautiful thing to be on fire. And finally, our special guest tonight, Dr. Cornel West. Prior to his current position as a professor at Union Theological Seminary in New York, Dr. West taught at Princeton Center for African American Studies since its founding in 2006 until 2012. In addition to his numerous contributions as a scholar and public intellectual, West made headlines recently with an arrest we know in Ferguson, Missouri, where he traveled to join with local activists in protesting the shooting death of Ferguson teenager Michael Brown. West described this experience saying, "I wanted to stand alongside the young leaders emerging there. I didn't want to replace them. I wanted them to be center stage, but I also wanted to let them know that there's a great tradition they are a part of, that they can learn from." And it's precisely this intergenerational conversation that Professor West brings to life in his new book, Black Prophetic Fire, and which frames our discussion tonight. With that, please help me in welcoming our three guests.
Okay, so I first want to thank Professor Benjamin for such a beautiful introduction, and also say how incredibly fortunate we are to have you as a member of our community and our faculty. And then just get right into it. We are living in a moment where the murder of Black young people by police is a quotidian event, literally, daily. We have over 2 million people in prison in this country. Black Americans are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We have, over the past 6 years, a massive loss of Black wealth, unprecedented. We have crises in numerous realms, like public health, education, we could go on. And so the first question I wanted to ask you is, why does, given all of that, right, and given how much of that has to do with kind of material conditions, why does what we do as intellectuals and scholars matter?
You want to take that?
No, that's you.
No, first I just want to say that it's a sweet thing to be back to Princeton. I want to thank you, Professor. Just to be on the stage with these two intellectual giants of their generation. I was blessed to meet both of them in 1991. Professor Perry was kind enough to work with Breaking Bread, which is the book that I was blessed to write with another giant named Bell Hooks. At that time, and of course, Brother Eddie, Professor Glaude, I met in 1991 as well. And, able to come back for me is a real moment of unadulterated joy, and I want to just register that. Again, Professor Benjamin, those kind of words. Professor Taylor here. Oh my God, I'm so glad
Yes.
you're here at Princeton. Give it up for Professor Taylor. Just being here.
Yeah.
I don't think your mic's on. Oh, it's still not on? Oh, mine's not on at all? You missed all of that.
Testing. Oh, wow. All right. No, what I was saying is that Brother Tommy knows this, that I am who I am because somebody loved me, and somebody cared for me, somebody attended to me. And I'm blessed to be part of a great tradition. Yes, it is a black prophetic tradition, but it's also a prophetic tradition that has to do with all human beings who muster the courage to attempt to tell the truth, and the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak and to understand the connection between that truth-telling on the one hand and the witness-bearing on the other. And so when I think of where we are now, I say to myself, well, you know, these multi-leveled catastrophes is nothing new for black people in the history of the American empire. And so like Sankofa, I always want to look back first before I move forward. I want to highlight the landmarks. And the landmarks, I'll be very brief, are first at the existential level, which is you have to have persons who are willing to muster the courage. Now, unfortunately, in late capitalist society, most academies are much more concerned with producing smart people rather than courageous ones. And the smartness is tied to dollars rather than courageous ones tied to truth-telling. That looks like Jeff Stout out there, too. He know what I'm talking about. Good God Almighty. I got so many friends here. I don't even know if my dear brother Robbie George is in the house. Tell that brother I love him, too. But Jeff, it's so good to see you. So good to see you. But we got to start
At this existential level, what kind of human beings are we going to be? We can't talk about
dealing with the chaos which comes. Oh, yeah, that's good. Is this all right? Can you hear me all right? But we can't talk about the chaos that results from the multi-level catastrophes without saying we are going to be hypersensitive to the suffering of the vulnerable and the weak, and therefore we're not going to be so obsessed with being smart. We're going to let the phones be smart. We're going to be courageous. We're going to be compassionate, and we're going to be wise. So already you're cutting against the grain in a society ruled by money, by cupidity, by big money, big banks, big corporations. And it means then you have to be connected. At the second level, you have to be connected with persons who are in conversation concerned with the narratives and analysis of power that keep track of indigenous peoples, poor peoples, chocolate peoples, gay, lesbian sisters, elderly, all of those who are left out. And the black prophetic tradition always begins with black people. It begins on the chocolate side of town. Why? Because so often they are the most hated, treated with the most contempt, despised with impunity. Police shooting young folk, hardly any go to jail. No accountability, no answerability, no responsibility whatsoever, just business as usual. We had a meeting in New York City just a year ago. 25 families of mothers sitting on the front row, all of their sons killed by the New York Police Department. Not one policeman going to jail. Then they wonder, how come you all full of rage, Brother West? Hey, who do you think I am? What kind of home training do you think I got? I love black people. When you love folks, you can't stand the fact they're being treated unjustly. You hate the fact they're being treated unfairly. You got to respond in some way. Existential level, courage. Analytical level, some analysis we'll get into. But then there's a political level. What kind of organizing, mobilizing, what kind of coming together. And I was so glad Professor Benjamin read that latter part. Because oftentimes in America, when people think about blackness, they think it's just concerned about black folk. That has never been the case. Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells Barnett, A. Philip Randolph, Martin King, Malcolm X at the end, Fannie Lou, Hamer, Ella Baker, they always start with the black catastrophe. No such thing as a Negro problem. It was a catastrophe visited on black people, slavery and Jim Crow and Jane Crow. But it spills over. And so I think in the analysis of where we are today from Ferguson and others, I know my dear brothers heading out to Ferguson. You and Brother George headed to Ferguson tomorrow, right? And I'm praying for y'all because, you know, the verdict's supposed to come down tomorrow morning or Monday morning. So we're walking right into not just chaos, but more than chaos. Police state, militarized police. And I'm pulling for you. As a Christian, I'm praying for you. But as a Christian, my prayers don't often get answered in the way that I like. But I keep praying anyway. But let me stop there and then turn it over, brother.
So Thank you, Professor Benjamin, for that wonderful introduction. And we are so blessed to have you and Professor Taylor and Professor Mirakawa and Professor Nishikawa join us in the Center for African American Studies. Can we give a hand to these wonderful folks? So people say that you sound shrill these days. Right, so you give us an account of the existential, the analytical, and the political. You begin with the catastrophe, the catastrophic. You have witnessed over the course of your career, right, a kind of journey in how you have been received, embraced, criticized, right, and in some ways downright vilified. This has taken on a particular resonance since 2008, given your criticism of President Obama. So you talk about the moment. How do you, looking back on it, right, how do you manage how you're often talked about in this current moment? And I could give you a typology about how you're often talked about. But
I don't really follow it that closely because I got so many things I'm trying to do in life, you know what I mean? But it's very important. I do believe in being Socratic, you have to listen very closely to your critics. You know, Nietzsche used to say you're only as strong as your critics. Now, your demonizers are different than your criticizers. You see, if they demonizing you, then I don't listen. They talk about my mom, I'm a Christian, not a pacifist. I'll slow down on them quick. I'll kick their so-and-so. I'm not like Martin in that sense. I'm not nonviolence all the way down. No, not me. But it is true that I've been vilified for a long time. I think my dear brother Larry Summers had his own species of vilification almost 13 years ago. It was before that as well. It's not just white brothers and sisters, it's black and brown and others. But I think it intensified in 2008 because the national spectacle of this brilliant, charismatic black brother on his way to the White House with a brilliant, charismatic black sister, Princeton grad, and give it up, Sister Michelle. Oh yeah, that's the Princeton legacy. That's part of the Princeton legacy. And the two magnificent children had a national spectacle. And after the 65 events that I did with him, I said in every event that I'm going to do everything I can to ensure he wins and try to bring an end to the age of Reaganism with the financializing and privatizing and militarizing. We could do it. Looks like we're the progressive. But I did say that afternoon I would break dance and celebrate. But the next morning I would emerge as his major critic. And I simply try to be true to my word. And the reason why I wanted to emerge as a major critic, because I knew he's dealing with an empire. He's dealing with a neoliberal capitalist regime. Wealth inequality, income inequality, privatizing of schools, closing down of public schools. He's dealing with a massive surveillance state that violates rights and liberties. I didn't think he would assassinate 4 Americans with no due process, no judicial review. I didn't think he'd go that far. But my God, any president who does that, I'm going to raise my voice, and it may sound shrill, because it's wrong. And not only that, but I remember Bobby Hutton shot down by FBI agents. I remember Fred Hampton in Chicago, shot down by FBI agents facilitated by the police. I remember a whole host of freedom fighters on the left. And you see, I believe, of course, that people have a right to be wrong. I'm a radical libertarian when it comes to freedom of expression and opinion and so forth. That's why Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning and so many others are heroes for me in terms of trying to make a transparency or relative transparency into what's going on in the shadow government. And I would like to know what's going on even more among the shadow economic activities on Wall Street. If we had known that in 2006 and 2007, we'd have a very different situation. And in some ways, we're right back to where we were before. you see. But it's that kind of transparency. So when people say, well, you're shrill, no, I've tried to be consistently on fire. That's
You once said, I think her mic works now,
Oh,
right?
is it working?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up. You said that, you once told me that this wasn't a time for polite speech.
Oh, that's true.
It wasn't a moment for polite speech. And
Well, it's not in public. I believe in being polite in terms of private manners. I believe in tenderness and sweetness and gentleness. But I don't believe in being polite in public when precious children are being shot down, or workers are being pushed against a wall, or sisters are being brutalized in domestic violence in private spaces. I don't believe when drones are dropping bombs on innocent children in Somalia and Yemen and Pakistan. I don't believe being polite in the face of rights and liberties being violated in terms of keeping track of all of our phone calls and thinking that somehow we are going to be potentially connected, or at least associated forces with terrorists, especially given the fact that Nelson Mandela was on the terrorist list of the United States until 2006. So which means the government can get things wrong as to who's a terrorist and who's not. And you can get them right too. ISIS, gangsters, thugs, genocidal, fascists, yes. ANC, African National Congress, no. No. And we can go on and on other examples.
So you talked about having, and we know that you were just in Ferguson. And one of the things, I mean, it was meaningful to me because one of the things that people, I think, often fail to understand is how present you are in many places, right? So that you go behind prison walls, right? You're in small towns, small churches, right? Look, and that's a different conception of sort of the public work of an intellectual than simply being on television. And I would like us to think a little bit about the significance of being present physically, a kind of embodied presence in different spaces, because you've said multiple times, and one of this question of that people can be wrong, right?
Absolutely.
And one of the things, one of the first lessons I recall you teaching me as a graduate student, you know, because I had been trained to think in relativistic ways, and you said somebody's got to be right and somebody's got to be wrong, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right, and so is there something about being present in places to witness that enables a deeper understanding? Does it matter to go there, to be in the space?
To be in that space, though, yeah. See, I don't think that there's ever one model or one monolithic way of intellectuals or academicians to do their work. It depends on what your calling is. It depends on being true to who you are. There are some people who are very soft-spoken and timid and going to the library and write magnificent work that has unbelievable implications for people in other contexts. That's a beautiful thing. Everybody's who they are, not somebody else. And so I would never think that, for example, those who are in the street have any monopoly on activism. There's a whole lot of different kinds of activism. For me, Toni Morrison is one of the great activists in terms of the creative, unbelievable deployment of language that cuts to the core of who I am. John Coltrane was an unbelievable activist because he blew his horn for 16 hours and went to bed with the horn in his mouth and woke up blowing. That was his way of being true to himself and true to his calling. But I have to be honest about what my calling is, and my calling is, in fact, being in a variety of different contexts. You see, so on Friday nights, I'm there at Broadway with my 150 students. I still wrote papers. I got 1,500 pages. I got to read each one. I wrote a 10-page paper. I got 150 students. So y'all pray for me, but that's part of my calling, to be with the brothers and engage them with Plato and Beckett and Du Bois and Toni Morrison. Same is true with the young folk in Ferguson. I went there, one, to let them know that they are loved, that I love them, that I'm old school, they're new school, and they should not think that all old school is represented by Al Sharpton. They need to know that. They need to know that. And I say that out of love for Al Sharpton. The Negro just wrong a lot of times, you know. The Negro just wrong. You sit on the stage all the time, get out of the spotlight. You don't have to be ontologically addicted to the camera. So when I went down there, I said, I'm not going to have one interview unless Ashley Yates is with me, unless Tefpo is with me, unless Alexis Templeton is with me, unless Tori Russell's with me. So they sit right next to me and I have them speak. Why? Because I just got there. I've been in New York and Princeton all this time. I don't know what's going on in Ferguson. And the corporate media, as superficial as they are concerned about ratings and market driven, you think they're fundamentally committed to the complexity of the truth? Get off the crack pipe. It's all about money, money, money. They want the visible ones, those who stimulate and titillate their audiences sitting on the couch to be stimulated and titillated. No, I'm committed to the truth. Capital T, no one ever possesses capital T. Small t with an S, yes, somebody's wrong, somebody's right, relative to the best evidence. You see. And the same is true with two sides of the story. The police have their side, and the black folk have their side. Yes, I believe in fair conversation, I believe in a fair trial. But I also know the history of these two sides. Sometimes it's like the earth is flat and the earth is round. We need two sides. No, we don't. No, we don't. No, we don't. Now the creationists are wrong. The earth is not flat. It looks that way, but it's just not. But the same is true about divisions, legacy, and white supremacy.
Right.
And if the voices of those precious black folk are rarely allowed to speak with power in all of their variety, and all you hear are the talking heads who are selected by a white power structure of a corporate media run by oligarchs and plutocrats, most of them vanilla, and even the chocolate ones have been socialized into their vanilla culture. So the only way they move to the top is remain silent when it comes to Precious Jamal and Letitia catching hell. Can you imagine what America would be like if 1 out of 3 precious white brothers were on parole, probation, or in prison? It'd be a different country, wouldn't it? But for black folk, it is. Can you imagine if 4% of all the babies in America lived in utter poverty in the richest nation in the history of the world? We'd have a different response to the crisis, wouldn't we? But that's what it is for brown and red and black babies. Hence the righteous indignation, the moral outrage, and so forth. And then the need for some analysis. Mm-hmm. Why is it that 1% of the population have 42% of the wealth, or the top 1% got 100% of the income growth in the last 5 years? And it's not just the black president, it's not just Obama administration. These are structural forces at work that Obama was unable to courageously hit head on. See? And he can say, well, he tried, he did everything. The Republicans kicked it. No, Republicans not that powerful. Republicans, obstructionists, cold-hearted, mean-spirited, too often when it comes to poor people, yes. But Democrats, milquetoast, spineless, always moving to the center, always moving to the center. Then you got the politicians when it comes to issues of public health, where they punt on second down rather than fourth down. They give up the struggle too soon. They don't push it to the edge. Sometimes you do lose, but at least push it to the edge. You don't compromise too early. And then the saddest thing is the young people, and of course, this book that my dear sister was so kind to mention is a love letter to the younger generation, you see. The last thing young folk need to hear is to be so polite and cautious when it comes to the murder, the soul murder in public schools, when it comes to massive unemployment. Can you imagine what we would be if those who loved us in the past were always just polite and conscious in the face of the white power structure? Should we still be Jim Crow to the core? Senior, we still Jim Crow Junior to the core. We still believe in Jim Crow. There's been a reniggerization of the black professional class. Just give them some position, wealth, and status, and they're still scared to tell the truth. They're still scared to take a risk. They're still scared to cut against the grain. Just give them a TV show. Just give them some visibility. And all of a sudden, they just move to the center. And you say, well, wait, what's going on there? What happened to the truth? Well, that's played out. I've got my career now. Oh, I see. I'm going on too long, but you see where I'm going with this.
Absolutely. What are we kind of taking?
The wonderful thing is young folk are hungry and thirsty for it. Now, things are shifting. Things are shifting. There's no doubt about it. And Princeton's a part of it, though. Princeton usually comes in. Princeton will come in kicking and screaming, you know what I mean? But never have any Ivy League institution, in all of its greatnesses and all of its blindnesses, been on the cutting edge of the struggle for justice. They catch up. They catch up. I see Brother Daniel sitting there. He knows what I'm talking about, written that magnificent historical, graphical work. They catch up because it takes a while for an institution with such longevity and white supremacy and anti-Semitism and anti-Arab and anti-Catholicism like Princeton, given the vision of those grand Presbyterians that founded this place. You see, and I salute them because I'm part of their tradition, but I've just got my revisions. But it takes a while for the institution as a whole to shift. And see what's happening in Ferguson, and you all going to see it tomorrow and thereafter, you see. There's no way that people can remain in the streets now for almost 80 days. That's a long time under police surveillance, all by themselves. That kind of fire is hard to put out. And that becomes contagious. And believe me, that if things do become explosive in Ferguson, there's a very good chance that it's not going to be exclusively Ferguson.
Well, let me shift just a bit. Professor Perry talked about your presence in places that don't necessarily align with your celebrity, right? How your celebrity is read. I want to talk a little bit about your habits of mind, your habits of reading.
Yes.
Right? How you imagine yourself as a particular kind of intellectual, and what you try to model in the very ways in which you read widely and deeply. Who are your resources, your walking partners that inform the fire? That there are a lot of different kinds of logs that stoke who you are as a human being. And I want to think about that practice, habits of mind, the craft of what it means to be an intellectual, in light of the distinction you made very quickly between intellectuals and academics in the context of a neoliberal academy. So could you talk about the state of black letters, the state of black intellectual life in light of your own conception of what it means to live the life of the mind?
Yes, I think one, when we look at the difference between intellectual and an academic is one who finds great pleasure in being in conversation with sophisticated voices, usually in a context of specialization, tied within the disciplinary division of knowledge in the academies. You're majoring in X, you're majoring in Y, and so forth. And that's very important. You do have to be conversant. The intellectual tends to have much more a sense of the whole, a synecdochic imagination, the relation of the parts to the whole, and willing to communicate that sense of the whole to a larger audience. Now, if you don't have serious conversation with the academics dealing with specialized knowledge, then your sense of the whole could be rather empty and superficial and vacuous. But on the other hand, if all you have are academics concerned about highly specialized forms of knowledge, then though the larger public still oftentimes is too far removed and doesn't benefit in the way in which it should with the knowledge that is being produced, you see. Now, I came along in the 1960s and 70s when we had figures like, Martin King and Malcolm and Ella Baker and
Stokely Carmichael and others, where we felt that whatever calling we had, intellectual or academic, it had to be connected, some organic link with struggles, organized struggles. So as soon as I got to Harvard, I was so glad to get there because I needed to get distant from California. Earth was quaking a little bit too much for me. We set a breakfast program. I couldn't be a member of the Black Panther Party, Christian, Jesus-loving, free black man. I said, fine, come on in, Brother West. Fine with me. Y'all atheists, beautiful. Wrong, but that's fine with me. No, you're wrong. Okay, let's dialogue. But same context of struggle. Same is true with prison. I had to have something outside of the academic bubble, as wonderful as the academic bubble was. And so all those years I was connected with prison and the breakfast program. Now, on the other hand, your wonderful question about habits of mind, you see, I was bit by the bug of sheer joy of reading. So I became somebody who just couldn't get through the day without at least reading 2 hours, 3 hours every day, even if I had to just steal away at night, turn off my Curtis Mayfield and Nina Simone, and just start reading. And I've been like that for every day of my life. And I just love it. It's just a joy. And it's reading everything. I think this book I was reading last night was The Meaning of Human Existence by Edward Wilson. It's a wonderful book. A powerful book. It crystallizes his whole career. What does he call for? We need unity of humanity. We need fights against tribalism. We need courageous persons because we're a dysfunctional species. That's what the sociobiologist says. And I say, I wholeheartedly agree. After his study of ants and a whole lot of other things that he does. That's his conclusion. I said, hey, I agree. Grandma agreed too. Even though she's got Christian narratives and he's got some deeply secular scientific ones, right? And he says, in the end, we might not even have the intellectual, spiritual, and moral resources as a species to deal with the catastrophes that are facing us. Yeah, I read narratives about that too. Human beings who are finite and fallen might not have the capacity to actually generate possibilities of freedom and democracy in human history. What do you do, Mr. Wilson? Well, I look to science. Well, science may not provide what's necessary. Maybe you need to just be committed to integrity, honesty, and decency regardless of the consequences, because that is the kind of human being you've chosen to be before the worms get you. Period. That's my tradition. Because if black folk had always had a utilitarian calculus, whatever we do is going to generate some black freedom no matter what. Get ready for the crack house. Get ready for the addiction. This is not about short-term utilitarian calculus when you're talking about the freedom of poor people or black people or anybody else. It's about what kind of human being you want to be, what they're going to say about you and you in the coffin. What kind of words will be used in describing you in the coffin? And more than likely it won't have too much to do with how much money you had and how big your house is and how superficially beautiful your spouse was on the outside as opposed to a deep relationship. They're not concerned about your moments when you said, say my name, say my name. They're going to wonder whether they said, did you try? Did you try a little tenderness the way Otis Redding sang it? That's what they're going to say when you're in the coffin. That kind of hit you a little bit too. You got something. I don't want to offend nobody. I'm just trying to describe some of the tendencies in late capitalist culture.
On that note of tendencies of late capitalist culture, there is something though about, and I understand what you're saying about sort of everybody has their own practice.
Right.
But there is something about the pursuit of meaning, right, that you're talking about, a meaningful life. And I think that the habit of reading or the habit of study given the landscape in which, a kind of neoliberal context in which we are in constant competition, in which attention is a commodity, in which people are endlessly trying to navigate getting access, research, right? That there's something about thought, retreat, right? Contemplation, right? If not simply for its own sake, but for the purpose of actually doing something meaningful in this world, that I think is not just important, but it's actually a radical intervention in this moment.
That's so very true. I mean, I think it's also true, though, that when Richard Hofstadter wrote his classic in '63, Anti-Intellectualism in America, and talked about how difficult it was for intellectuals to find a role, a meaningful role in a business civilization, a civilization obsessed with buying and selling, obsessed with pecuniary gain, driven by cupidity, as opposed to fraternity, as Hofstadter puts it. And looking now 50 years later,
Much worse it is.
it's so much worse. It's so much worse. But this is, of course, again, the crucial role of that larger historical backdrop. Now, of course, then the response often is, well, you get anti-intellectual intellectuals. Right.
Anti-intellectual intellectuals.
Yes, you get those who pose as if,
Parlor intellectuals.
yes, that's it. That's it. I mean, they don't want to linger with the complexity. They don't want to linger with the subtlety. They want to pose as if they're intellectuals, but at the same time, they don't want to be disciplined and do the work necessary to then be able to straighten their backs up and lay bare the truth as they understand it, and then connect it to bearing the witness, which usually means, of course, paying a cost. How you doing like this? That's good to see you. The paying a cost. And of course, let's be honest, for black folk, you know, anybody, any sister or brother who publicly talks about the vicious legacy of white supremacy with frank, plain, unintimidated speech usually means you live under death threat. You see. And so, as you know, when I was in Boston, they showed up at my crib and with shotguns and put a gun to my wife's head and so forth. That's not a plaything at all. So when you get the calls after you're on television that we're gonna put a brain thing in your nigger brain and so forth, or call your family up and your mothers and so forth, that does something to you. And so then you have to decide, what are you really made of? How you make sure it's justice rather than hatred and instinct is the hatred and revenge when you get treated in that way. There's over 900 white supremacist militia groups in America, and many of us have the names at the top. You see, so it becomes a very different kind of context in that way. And we're just talking about white supremacy. We're only talking about making the connection of white supremacy and empire and imperial practices. You see, when you take a stand, for example, in the Middle East with Palestinian brothers and sisters vis-a-vis a vicious Israeli occupation. Oh, Brother West, you anti-Semitic. No, I love Jewish brothers and sisters. I just want them to love the truth and justice too. And it applies to Palestinian babies like it applies to Israeli babies. Each baby has the same value. Oh, Brother West, that still looks out of anti-Semitism. And you got to redefine your conception of anti-Semitism then. You see, because I know a whole lot of Jewish brothers and sisters with integrity who understand how vicious that Israeli occupation is. But when you do that, what happens? There's a cost. You just make sure there's no anti-Jewish and anti-Jewish hatred, anti-Jewish prejudice in your formulation. It's based on principle. But that doesn't mean you lose sight of the precious Palestinians in that particular context, or the precious Jewish babies being killed by rockets on the other side with Hamas. You just have to be unpopular.
So let me talk about this unpopularity for a second. I mean, that's a really powerful formulation on a certain level, right? Because there was once a moment where you were at the height of popularity. Race matters. And you've narrated a particular story for me before in our private conversations about what does it mean to be the darling of white liberals?
Oh, yes.
And then what does it mean to no longer be the darling of white liberals? And you've told me a story about 3 particular folks that you now are among them in some ways. Why don't you say a little bit more about what does it mean to be projected on the one hand in a certain way and then find yourself in this moment? And this is a kind of subset of the first question, right, in terms of how people read you, the notion of unpopularity, how people read your accounts and the like. But, you know, from Baraka to Ishmael Reed, you know, that story you've told me before.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Do I get a chance to ask you all questions? Should I get a chance to ask you all some questions? I can ask you all some questions. Is that all right? I'm going to ask this real quick, and then I'm going to turn the tide on you. But,
And then we're going to come to you guys.
there are giants far, far greater than I could ever be. Paul Robeson of Princeton is the most popular Negro in the world with a talent beyond description, who ended his life under house arrest in Philadelphia. And his best friend, W.B. Du Bois, in Brooklyn. Both of them pushed to the margins. There's James Baldwin, oh my God, the darling of white liberals. The death of Martin and Malcolm and Medgar changed him into a much more explicit, more shrill-like militant, but the subtlety was still there. He's pushed to the side. Gwendolyn Brooks wins the Yale Prize given by the inimitable W.H. Auden in 1950. Embraced by all of the literati. Here comes the black arts movement. Haki Mahibute, towering figure that he was, Sonia Sanchez and others. She says, I'm in solidarity with them. She's pushed to the side. What are some of the results? No reviews of her books in any of the mainstream journals whatsoever. Banished. Almost the way Brother Noam Chomsky is banished by corporate media for his truth-telling, you see. Ishmael Reed would be another, and of course there's Leroy Jones / Mary Baraka. Darling of white liberals, Bohemia, Greenwich Village, close Allen Ginsberg and a host of others. Moves up to Harlem, founds the National Arts Theater, changes his name, and is demonized for almost 35 years. He's not always right, not always wrong. But that is one of the consequences. Now, my plight is nowhere comparable to theirs. I don't think so. You think maybe so? But let me ask y'all a question, though, because just to be able to function now, not just here at this grand place, Princeton, but in the intellectual environment in which you find yourself, how would you contrast that to the kinds of things we talked about 20 years ago when you were my teaching assistants at Harvard? Is that a fair query, you think?
It is.
Yeah. And then the same one to you, Dora?
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that's fascinating to me is that because now we live in the digital age, we live in the information age, we live in an age where things go viral, we live in an age where everything is public. And so one of the things that's fascinating is that when people say, oh, you weren't making a critique of the U.S. presidency 20 years ago, I'd say, actually, yes, that was taking place, right, pretty in a kind of robust fashion, but there wasn't this kind of hyper-visibility. And I actually think there's something incredibly important about being in deep conversation, right, over a long period of time on issues of social import and figuring out what that means for the calling. I think now again, I go back to the cycle of attention, but the seduction is so powerful, right? And so so what that means is that I think particularly for young scholars and activists and artists, yes, right, yes, that there's a tendency to want to come out before one is cooked. Right?
Say that again.
Yeah, that's right.
A tendency to want to come out before one is fully cooked, right? Before you actually know what you think, people start talking, right, in public. And I think that what's difficult about that then means that your driver is to talk, right, not to be right. And so I think in terms of the environment, and I think the seduction is present all across the board. I mean, even for those of us who were having a different kind of conversation 20 years ago, to constantly have to ask oneself, right, why am I doing what I'm doing? What are the stakes of it? Where do my commitments lie? If I decide to say this, what are the consequences? Is it worth it? Why is it worth it, right? To not get this, to not get that, right? And so I think it demands, it's a difficult landscape, but it also demands a constant confrontation with the question of integrity. So.
I'm really, I'm thinking about it, and 20 years ago, we were thinking in the context of the height of Black studies in some ways. Yeah. Right. So not only did you have, we saw various debates, PhD program at Temple, Skip and Malefia Sante going at it, then of course Harvard, the PhD program in Harvard, then of course in the middle of that, the British wave comes in, Paul Gilroy, Stuart Hall, Black British cultural studies. We were in the midst of, right, an intense ferment, right? In which people were really grappling with ideas at the very moment in which Black studies was achieving a level of institutional presence in the academy that it had never had before, in my mind. And underneath that were these various, or within that were these various currents, right? Various currents, various ways in which people were imagining themselves and positioning themselves as folk who inhabit this space, this newly found secured institutional space. And so what's interesting about today is that I see a lot of what I took to be the underside of what was happening 20 years ago, to be the dominant tendency. So there was a moment when everyone would say about Skip, he's brilliant, he's ingenious, but he has this entrepreneurial approach to the academy, right? You kind of say, well, what is the life of that tendency, right? There's a moment, even though in that period, where you emerged as a particular figure, right? Folk know you by Race Matters, but they don't. What about happened to American Evasion, Keeping Faith, Ethical Dimensions of Marxism, Prophesy, Deliver? We can just go down the line with the books, but Race Matters hits, boom, pop, explosion. You become the face of public intellectuals, Black public intellectuals. Suddenly, right, you get all of these B movies, right? People trying to be the public. What is the tendency? That trend emerged, and now what is the dominant tendency? And so the idea of craft, of sitting still. I remember you used to tell me all the time, brother, you got to get your reading done. Brother, you're not doing your reading, right? Or you would say, when somebody's talking, they not reading. And Jeff, you know what I'm talking about, right? They not reading, right? And so there was an attention to craft that has almost been overwhelmed by the speed of ascendance,
yes,
right? By the demand of a certain kind of publicity, by the
content production.
So I'm not saying that this is I don't want to have a then now narrative. I don't want to talk about a decline in that sense, but what I'm thinking about are the effects, the implications of the institutionalization of a particular kind of practice, and what has happened to, right, a tradition of Black letters, right? What does it mean to model a certain kind of excellence in what we do?
No, but see, both of you all you're really pushing me here, because the truths that I hear you saying, I feel very deeply. See, I would use the language of decline. I would. To go from Aretha to Beyonce is decline. I'm telling the truth now. I love Beyonce, but she knows, in terms of mastery of craft, of technique, of moving the soul, of stirring your bones, being part of a tradition you're rooted in, that's different than
superficial spectacle on the stage, shaking your thing as you sang it with a powerful voice. She's a great entertainer. Aretha Franklin is a rare artist of any genre. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. There is a decline when you have groups that took time to learn how to sing in tune and bring their voices together, like the Delphonics and the Dramatics and the Dells and the Temptations and the Miracles and the Emotions and the Jones Girls, and we can go on and on. Where is that now? Where is it now? The oligarchs and plutocrats who control the recording, radio, and video industries are not interested in that kind of craft. They want to make big money. They want stimulatory music. They want thin stuff. They don't want soul stirrers like Sam Cooke and Johnny Taylor and Lou Rawls. They want body stimulators. They don't want songs that are thick in story and narrative the way Smokey Robinson wrote them, or the way Linda Creed and Tom Bell wrote them for the Stylists and Delphonics and so forth. There is a shift, and it is a decline. It's called the predatory capitalist move toward intense commodification that puts money, and profit at the center. It includes the university. Princeton is much more commodified now than it was before. You end up with these superficial politicians getting professorships. You say, hey, what's going on? How come they here? Well, they got connections. I don't give a damn about the connections. I want sophisticated formulations. You get big money people from all around the world who give money for chairs and name it after themselves. Or you get the Hutchinson Center for Afro-American Studies at Harvard rather than the Du Bois Center for Afro-American Studies, because Hutchinson is a white hedge fund brother who got big money, and Du Bois just wanted to love poor people, and black people's willing to give his life doing it. His name goes off the building. Hey! The issue, Du Bois said there's 4 issues you wrestle with. How does integrity face oppression? What does honesty do in the face of deception? What does honesty do in the face of insult? How does virtue meet brute force? That's what Du Bois says in 1957 in his first novel, The Ordeal of Manzard. He wrote it when he was 86 years old. That was the beginning of his trilogy. The brother, 86 years old, just embarking on the trilogy after he'd been put in handcuffs by the U.S. government 5 years earlier, in February of 1951. Integrity, honesty, decency, virtue. Anybody who is obsessed with those 4 will be profoundly countercultural in a highly commodified culture.
Yeah.
Wow. Which means you're not going to get a lot of payoff. But you'll have a sense of a higher moral, and as a Christian I would say a higher moral and spiritual standing. And that's the kind of people who raised me. You see, Irene, Clifton, my grandparents, Shiloh Baptist Church, all they said to me was, when we send you off to Harvard, and we send you off to Princeton, and you're going to meet some wonderful folk, John Rawls, and Willie Putnam, and Paul Nazareth, and Sheldon Wolin, and Richard Rorty, and Carl Hempel. These will be folk who, in taking you seriously, they will push you and challenge you, but you got something to bring too. You come out of a tradition too. Oh yeah. And part of what you bring with him is that same finite, fallible commitment to integrity, honesty, decency, and a sense of virtue. And those who opt for that road these days is the road less taken. But always miles to go before we sleep. Always. So the issues of integrity you all were talking about become even more and more difficult. That's why I use the word decline. Now see, when I say that, about the young folk, and they say, oh, Brother West, you so hard on the young people. No, it's out of love. I respect the young folk. You still got Jill Scott and Angie Stone. You still got Anthony Hamilton. Everybody's just not singing just to make money. And some of them really singing in tune. In the right pitch, you see. Because they're artists in the deepest sense. They're just not entrepreneurial.
in the narrow sense. And the same is true with folk in the academy. You still got the Jeff Stouts and the Anthony Graftons and the Daniel Rogers and yourselves and others fundamentally committed to intellectual integrity. You do. But they got to cut against the grain of the commodifying sectors of the university that need big, big, big money. I thank God for Brother Harold Shapiro and Sister Shirley Tillman, who brought me here, especially when I was in trouble. Took a lot of courage to bring a brother like me to Princeton when I was in trouble like that. You know, Shirley just stepped out. Come on, I know we're going to get a lot of letters every time you're on television, which they did, hundreds of them. He was nothing but a communist. How can he be at Princeton? Woodrow Wilson put it over in his grave. We go on and on and on. But they stood with me.
We want to begin to, maybe we should turn it out to the audience and begin, you guys can begin to ask some questions. You guys have a mic out there? Do we have mics here? So we can begin to, any questions?
We also need to take some of the online.
So there was so let's take a couple of questions, and then we have an online community as well who've sent in some questions as well. So, and please, let's ask a question.
No statements.
All right? and have an economy of formulation.
Good evening. My name is Khalid Love. I am a senior in the math department, and I'm also getting a certificate in African American Studies.
Right.
I had a question for, I guess, you, Professor West, Dr. West. You talk a little bit about sort of black studies, and, you know, in my class with Imani Perry about blackness in America, we talk about sort of the social existence of blackness and looking at sort of by historical association, blackness and black studies sort of bears a certain kind of intimacy with Western civilization. And so my question to you is, what is the role of black studies in terms of critiquing Western civilization? And is there a distinction between the object of black studies and then the aim of black studies?
Wonderful question. Oh, you all. See, what I love about black studies, this is true for all the great humanistic disciplines, you don't just train, but you educate. You don't just school, but you educate. And that question came out of education. Because we need a seminar to answer the question. But no, Western civilization, of course, is like any civilization. There's some magnificent insights and arguments and visions, and there's some ugly ones tied to barbarism, bestiality, and brutality. I don't know of a civilization of humankind that doesn't have some grand insights on the one hand and ugly forms of barbarism on the other. And so, of course, myself, I come out of a particular set of traditions, including the language I dream under, the language of Shakespeare and Milton and Toni Morrison and others, the English language. And I'm in the American Empire. The American Empire is fundamentally shaped by certain streams and strands of Western civilization. And therefore, if I'm trying to make sense of it, I'm going to have to try to mobilize certain kinds of analytical insights, certain kinds of narratives for motivation from both the West, but open to the non-West. And that's also part of Western civilization. Western civilization has always been obsessed with other civilizations because there's no such thing as an autotelic autonomous civilization. All of these civilizations are hybrids. They've pulled from a variety of other cultures and civilizations in that way. Now, for me, the fundamental question always is, what does it mean to be human? That has been the fundamental question for the black prophetic tradition. Because when you talk about integrity, honesty, decency, and virtue, you're talking about what it means to be human of any civilization. It could be the high civilizations of the East. It could be our indigenous brothers and sisters. It could be the great African civilizations wrestling with what it means to be human. That little move from mama's womb to tomb. What goes into that move is quick. It's not a lot of time. And the choices you make, the decisions you make, and so forth. And for me to be able to be in conversation with younger generation is part of trying to keep these kinds of questions alive. We had a wonderful dialogue with our dear sister Breonna Payton. Is Breonna here? Where is she? Yeah, give it up for Sister Breonna. Oh, we had a wonderful dialogue. Same issue. as it relates to both Afro-American studies in particular, humanity in general. Part of the problem has been that most people think when you follow the line of humanity, then it stops and then Negroes kick in. That's why when you read the New York Times, Toni Morrison will write a novel and say, oh, she's written a wonderful novel about black identity and the black experience. And you read a review of a play by the great Eugene O'Neill. Oh, what insight into the human condition he has. No, we're talking about Irish brothers and sisters. Everybody's got a particularity through which they are wrestling with universality and humanity. But no, when it comes to black folk, brown folk, red folk, they're just wrestling with identity. They got to come to terms with their identity. We got to be sensitive to their wrestling with identity. And everybody else on the vanilla side wrestling with the human condition. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. The humanity cuts all the way across, And this is especially when it comes to black sisters and brown sisters and red sisters. We haven't begun to delve into the ugliness, the ways in which that patriarchy gets tied into white supremacy when it comes to poor, women of color, class, and empire. All of these issues become crucial. So the answer to your question, though, brother, is Western civilization is indispensable and inadequate.
Other questions? Yes. Who has the mic? Please, right here.
Okay. Hello?
Hello? Okay. Hi, I'm Kobe Coles. I'm a senior in the Woodrow Wilson School. And my question, I was particularly touched and kind of concerned by a comment that Professor Perry brought up on the concept of young people today kind of speaking before we know what we're talking about, speaking before we know what we think. Because I think it's an issue that we need to address, because young people want to get engaged in the conversations. We want to get engaged. We want to go into the streets. We want to get active and be activists in these different fields, be it writing or on the streets or speaking. And a lot of students and myself actually have started projects where we write a lot on race here at Princeton. And we publish it. It's on a blog, and it's all about the digital age. But when we started, we viewed this kind of as, oh, these are opportunities to get our voice out there, but now I see the concerns that you're bringing, where having so easy access to putting our thoughts out there might not be the best thing right now. So I'm wondering, how do we kind of navigate this concern of, one, doing our reading, we should do our reading and like learning, but also kind of like voicing and like getting the young generation active. I don't really want to sit back and wait until we're, like in academia to finally start voicing our concerns.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I was speaking specifically of the world of academic production in that instance. But I do think it's important to draw the distinction between getting one's voice out and participation, because those are two different things. And it's actually the logic of kind of both the hypermedia landscape and neoliberalism that makes one think that saying something is the same thing as participation, right? So you can actually be involved, and I think, I expect from, my ideal is that from the age of being small children, that we are nurturing people to be involved, to be in conversation, to be critically engaged with the world as it is, to think that they have something meaningful to offer to that conversation, which is very different, I think, than simply sort of branding oneself as an expert on something, to be as a go-to person, right? So I absolutely think it's incredibly meaningful and important, and in fact, oftentimes it is younger people who have the kind of courage that we need to push the conversation forward. But to draw a distinction, we have to draw a distinction between that and wanting to build a brand.
Take another before we go. Yes? You're going to have to help right here, and you're going to have to help me on this side, because I have this big thing.
Hi, my name is Shri. I'm a freshman, undecided, but strongly considering an African-American studies major. In your book, More Beautiful and More Terrible, and a lot of your other texts...
Could you bring the mic up a little bit more, though?
Sorry. You speak of the nature with which negative social narratives can perpetuate post-intentional racism and discrimination. Even if you're not a member of the even if you're not African-American, what can we do to help rewrite those social narratives? And if it's okay, I'd like all of your guys' inputs.
I would start with the author of that wonderful book.
one of the things we talk about in the book is the work of shifting the narratives, right? So that we are so shaped by racial narratives that it actually dictates, there's a cumulative effect of these dominant racial narratives where it shapes how we interact with people, right? So people talk about institutional and structural racism, but institutions are actually sustained by human beings. And we sustain institutions in ways that disadvantage along the lines of race, along the lines of gender, along the lines of sexuality, et cetera, because we are taught to do so. And we accept those lessons and we perpetuate them. So shifting the narratives, actually, I think is an important move. And part of narrative shifting actually has to do with, I think, the project of discovery, right? A kind of analytical project, understanding how power relations work, right? So if you drive through, I use this example in the book, you drive through the hood and you see dirt all over the place and trash in the streets, and you say, oh, well, see, these are people who don't care about their community, right? That's one read. Or you could see how frequently the street cleaners come to that part of town, right? And then to actually tell a different kind of story as a result of that. I also think narrative shifting occurs by virtue of what you do with your life, right? So I use an example in the book of kids, and Baltimore is a city that has been, like many others, has been plagued with educational inequality, and I use an example of young people there going to the State House from underfunded schools and demanding educational equality. And that act shifts the narratives of poor black kids don't care about education, right? So I do think that the way that we choose to live our lives can actually confront racial narratives in pretty profound ways.
We have a question from online. I'd love to read it. It says, how, and this is to us, right? How do we incorporate the anger and despair of our new young generation of blacks into a crisis that has persisted for nearly a century? How do we incorporate the anger and despair of a young generation of black folk into a crisis that has persisted for nearly a century?
Yeah, I think anytime we're talking about white supremacy, it's not just a black affair. It's indigenous peoples, it's Latinos, it's Asians, but it is black rage which constitutes the major threat to the status quo. Red rage, yellow rage, brown rage has never put fear in the hearts and minds and souls of the rulers as black rage. And that's one of the reasons why the concern about black people had been at the center. And of course, the Civil War, the most barbaric of civil wars of modern times, over what is the status of these New World Africans, these black peoples, you see. And so one of the challenges of the black prophetic tradition has always been never to deny the rage. Because you deny the rage, it just devours black people. And that's in part what's been going on for the last 30 years with the class war against poor and working people. The black people turned on themselves, each other, and inside of their own souls, hearts, and minds, and bodies, you see. But the question is, when that rage emerges, as it may well again, in the next few days in Ferguson, as I said before, how do you channel it through love and justice? Because the hatred and revenge just reinforces the cycle of domination, of hatred, of oppression, and revenge. And there's no accident that Marcus Garvey used to always have a black man or woman in the front of every rally, and they always say, "The Negro is not afraid," even if they were sitting there shaking. Like Kanye West when he talked about George Bush, doesn't care about black people. He got smooth flow on the stage. That Negro was scared because his whole career was at stake. He knew that. But the Negro is not afraid. How do you shatter the fear, allow the righteous indignation to come forward, and then move to a love and justice with coalescing with others? You see? Because there's a rage inside of young white brothers and sisters, and brown, right, and red, and others, because they're concerned about integrity, honesty, decency, and virtue. They're concerned about taking a moral stand and a spiritual stand in that garbage.
And so as this anger and rage becomes more and more salient and public, more and more, of us are going to have to speak in a drumbeat-like way of this centrality of love and justice. Because, see, if black rage could bring down the curtain on the American democratic experience, we got to be honest about that. When Brother Martin was shot in over 200 cities who had rebellions that shook the foundation of this nation, they brought out the National Guard. You all know the story. Oh, no, maybe the young folk don't know, but y'all need to know this. They brought out the National Guard to defend the White House because there was a chance that they were going to burn that White House down. That's how deep Martin was loved. That's how deep the connection was. That black people knew deep down in their minds when Martin was in that paddy wagon, that jail on wheels on the way to Reedsville prison in 1960 with a German shepherd and him, the only two animals in that wagon for 4.5 hours jabbing at Martin. And when he got out, it looked like he had a nervous breakdown, but all he could say was, this is the cross we must bear for the freedom of our people. Now see, that's love. That's courage. That's integrity. And when he shot down like a dog, bring down the curtain on America, let it go. That's what Stokely said. Stokely spoke on behalf of a whole lot of black people. Is that right, Brother Tommy? You understand? Something died in black people when Martin was killed. Something died in me. Was gone. How do I accent the best? That's not just him, but what went into him, all of that love and concern and sensitivity. Well, that can happen again, y'all. But believe me, you, in 1968 and 200 rebellions, 2014, for a socially neglected, economically abandoned group of young black folk who are tied to the new Jim Crow in the prison industrial complex with schools producing social murder every day of their souls. What kind of raise is that going to be? I talked to the brothers in the prison right now after 37 years. There's a qualitative shift in the brothers in prison now than the ones when I started teaching 37 years ago. Qualitative shift. Colder, hardened, more unloved, more uncared for. Allow that rage to come out. And then America said, oh, maybe we should have dealt with this a little earlier. You don't say. How much do you think they could take? How much would you take if that was your child? In your neighborhood, in your schools, in your level of unemployment, in your level of being disrespected in that way? That's a serious question. That's a serious set of questions, you see. And in that sense, I've always said that white America, when they see black people, they ought to just give them a standing ovation. Because when you have that level of terror, trauma, and stigma coming at you for 400 years, and black folks still decide not to create a black Al-Qaeda? Who could put up with 400 years of terror like that, especially among your poor and working classes? And we still keep dishing out John Coltrane's Love Supreme, still keep dishing out the Stevie Wonders, and still keep dishing out all this talk about love and justice rather than just being gangsters like the folk who's gangsterizing us. That's the natural response, When you terrorize, you counter-terrorize. That's not Douglas, that's not Harriet Tubman, that's not Sojourner Truth. It's in the face of terror, they're talking about justice. That might not always be the case. And when we reach that point, then it's basically over. I mean, the democratic experiment is over. It's gone police state, it's gone crypto-fascist. It's like Sinclair Lewis, it can't happen here in 1934. America goes fascist. There is a possibility. It depends on younger generation. Keep it as free, keep it as democratic, very much what my dear sister and brother up on this stage and their magnificent works have been talking about now for, what is now 20 years? Your career now 20 years?
Not quite that long.
About 15.
15.
Your career is 20 years? Wow. I know we got some other questions.
Questions? Yes.
Hello, Ben. My name is Ozoma Abrahamaha. I'm a politics major with a certificate in GSS. And so my question is, when thinking about Blackness, there's always conversation about space and temporality. In this context, how should we, or is there even space for, moving from attempting to fill emptiness, silence, and dominant discourse, and begin to push our communities, building space in which we can begin to breathe without pain?
Go ahead, Doc. No, that's you. Well, these questions, thank you so much for this. These questions are powerful. Breathe without pain. My God. You can see why we created the blues. And jazz, too. It's hard to provide a direct answer to that question. It's such a complicated question about spatiality and temporality, about space and time. Historically, black people in the United States have been much more a people of time than of space because we've been oftentimes landless. And when we had access to land, it could be taken by force or fraud. So that time became crucial, and so oftentimes with our bodies, we'd stylize those bodies through time, the way you walk and talk and sing and relate to each other as a way of providing some space. You know, the great August Wilson used to say that black people authorize an alternative reality through performance. Because it's in performance where you have most freedom. In the speaking and the singing, even the performance in the boxing ring of a Muhammad Ali, who was both a great performer as well as a magnificent athlete. You can enact the freedom in performance, which is a foretaste of the freedom you want in the larger society. But for so long, nearly every sphere of the larger society was a structure of unfreedom and unfairness. And so within temporality, there was a certain kind of freedom. Now, things have changed in the last 30 or 40 years because we've been able to gain access, especially our middle classes and a few slices of our upper classes, gain access to the mainstream. And there the question always is, are we able, through time, able to preserve our sense of what went into the best of the making of a people? Because in the age of Obama, we had, I've never seen so many black people waving the flag. And you see, I'm not a flag waver, I'm a cross bearer. And so for me, the cross signifies unarmed truth and unconditional love. When that flag conforms to truth and love, I'll wave it. When it doesn't, I'll put it down. And I can't sing the national anthem that well anyway, so I'll make an effort, keep track of the best of America. But when black folk become flag wavers and the cross bearers become few and in between, then there's fewer concerned with truth, fewer concerned with love. What does that flag signify in its dominant form in America? Liberty for all? No. What does it signify? Power. Black folk want power. Yes, we want power. Under what conditions? What's the ethical content of it? Do you want power in such a way that you still just want to be a member of an empire that mistreats other folk around the world? Oh, well, so we weren't serious about truth and justice. You're concerned just about your interests. Say so. That's not part of the black freedom struggle. That's part of the black attempt to become assimilated into a mainstream that turns its back on poor and working people. And you just happen to not be poor working at the moment. We don't know how long it's going to last. So that this issue of access to more space, which has happened in the last 30 or 40 years, has to be analyzed in terms of under what conditions.
I think we are coming to an end.
Maybe one last question?
Wow,
we got a lot of one last question.
One last question.
Oh, yes, you all been very patient, very patient.
Oh, we got to go to the balcony. I'm sorry, one from the balcony.
Oh, indeed. And we had gender balance too in the question there, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah, that's cool.
So my question is about the form of what a possible new revolution of culture would look like. You all talked about the embrace of the speed of ascendance, and you said the commodification of attention and how that's really important to this time. And I'm thinking about the way in which we exist in two bodies today, our cyber extension and our physical bodies, and how a lot of the young people are way more likely to express pain, the pain that they're experiencing in their physical bodies through their cyber bodies, and how I believe that's problematic because there's extreme disconnect. So my question is about, in a world where our structure and even our parents and some of us, the reason why we're here is for a quick ascendance, and we have parents who dream about their kids having money and feeling comfortable. That's what they want from us. How do you tell people, how do you teach people the importance of integrity, the importance of craft, and time and the role of the revolution and structural change rather than immediate results and numbers?
No, but just the eloquence with which you ask that question is such a sign of hope. And this is true for the questioners across the board. Because one could feel your spirit and your hunger for that's something more, what we would call an integrity. Absolutely. For me, you see, I'm still old school in the sense that I believe in radical democracy. So how do you get democratic accountability of banks, big banks, who make big deals? They don't produce any big products the way the old corporations used to, just big deals, you see. Why? Because we can't talk seriously about the kind of fundamental change that's needed without distribution of resources, you see. Same is true with privatizing. Of course, the private sphere is very important. I would even say it's sacred in many ways in terms of rights and liberties. But when it's privatized by big entities for aims of profit, short term, not even long term these days, rather than public life, public good, then democratic accountability required. Same is true with militarizing, you see. Outsourcing military activities. How do we get some democratic accountability and transparency? So I'm still in some ways old school enough to be tied to radical notions of democracy here. Very radical notions. That's not in any way, an answer. I mean, democracy is a proximate solution to insoluble problems, as Niebuhr used to say, because you still have human beings who have fears, anxieties, and insecurities, and you have to speak to them on very psychic and spiritual level as well to be certain kinds of human beings. And even radical democracy won't necessarily provide enough resources, even though it at least will tilt the society much more toward public service, public life, public conversation of high quality as it preserves very sacrosanct private spaces. But that's just the beginning of an answer to your very profound question. You all want to end up with a response to that?
I just have a quick thought, which I think this is it's an incredibly difficult question. And it's difficult not simply because of the expectations upon you, but because we all have to make a living, right? So we have to navigate the world as it is on its terms, even if, and so but I do think that there's a piece of maturity at best, right? When we become mature, we create space for a kind of insurgency, right? And by that I mean a sense of the possibility that comes from inside, right? A kind of insurgency that is not simply what you've been socialized to do, what you've been trained to do, but actually about that pursuit of meaning. And I don't know how one can be doctrinal about that, right? How do we dictate that happening? But I do think that part of coming into the fullness of who you are as a person is making those kinds of decisions. What does it mean for me to have a meaningful life? What would that consist of? How do I produce a life that is meaningful given the constraints which I'm confronted with? And also, how do I create communities that enable me to have some support and some connection as I try to do that? I think we have to be careful about the cyber self, but it does allow for some communication, and it allows for some democratization, right? We can't romanticize that, right? Because they are corporations that create the digital space so often. But is there a way, the question is there a way to do that, to create the communities for the possibility of that transformation?
And for me, just by way of really quickly, by way of answering your brilliant question, we have to constantly grapple with this question: who do I take myself to be? Right? So wherever I am, understanding that I'm going to fall short, I always know that I'm Juanita's child. And when I say that, I have a center of gravity, right, to bring myself back into alignment. So I'm constantly asking myself the question and trying to answer that question: what kind of human being, who do I take myself to be? Right? And it seems to me that as we engage in that lifelong work of trying to come up with an answer to that question, that is the kind of groundwork of the formation of attention that holds off all of those forces that are aimed at deforming our attention. Does that make sense? Can we thank Dr. West and Dr. Perry? Thank you.